Montana farmers work hard to keep their food products safe and flavorful for consumers. In fact, the United States has one of the safest food supplies in the world. But outbreaks of foodborne illnesses caused by listeria, salmonella, and other bacterial pathogens prompted lawmakers to improve food safety standards. In 2010, the U.S. Congress passed the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, to help reduce foodborne illness outbreaks. President Obama signed it into law in 2011, and it was placed under the authority of the Food and Drug Administration. In 2015, the FDA finalized the rules for FSMA. Now, Montana must implement these new food safety rules. There are 7 major rules of FSMA. In Montana, one rule especially affects our produce growers. This is the Produce Safety Rule. The goal of this rule is to keep Montana produce safe for consumers. The practices within the rule are good standards for all farms to implement, regardless of size and sales. However, not all farms are legally subject to the rule. So, every farmer wants to know, is my farm subject to the rule? As a farmer, you are either covered by the rule or you are not. If you are covered by the rule, you are subject to it. If you are exempt from the rule, you are not subject to it. Not all farms are subject to the rule. This depends on what you grow, who your buyers are, the purpose of your produce, and how much produce you sell. You are not subject to the rule if the produce you grow is only for personal or family consumption. You are free to grow fruits and vegetables for your family without being subject to the rule. Also, you are not subject to the rule if your average annual produce gross sales are less than $25,000. This average is based on the previous 3 years and is adjusted for inflation. The Montana Department of Agriculture has the inflation table on their food safety webpage. Please use the table to find out if you are exempt each year. Some farms grow produce along with other food commodities. If your produce sales are less than $25,000, you are fully exempt from the rule. Also, some produce is exempt from the produce safety rule because it's rarely eaten raw. Lentils, sugar beets, chickpeas, potatoes, and winter squash are good examples of this type of produce. You can find a full listing of exempt produce on the Department of Agriculture website. If a certain produce item is not listed, assume it's subject to the rule. Most food grains are also not subject to the rule. This includes grains such as wheat, barley, and field corn. Again, if a grain is not listed, assume it is subject to the rule. Finally, produce that will be commercially processed to reduce microorganisms are not subject to the rule. For example, tomatoes that will be processed and canned into tomato sauce are not affected. Now, if you sell more than $25,000 in produce each year, you may still be eligible for a qualified exemption. And that's where things can get a little tricky. If you fall under a qualified exemption, you are subject to modified requirements rather than the full produce safety rule. You may fall under a qualified exemption if the majority of your sales are local or sold within the same state, Indian reservation, or within 275 miles of your farm. And your farm's average total annual food sales are less than $500,000. Again, this average is based on the previous 3 years and is adjusted for inflation, so utilize the inflation table on the Department of Agriculture's website. Food sales are defined as articles used for food or drink for man or other animals, including produce, grain, hay, meat, dairy, eggs, and processed or value-added foods. You must answer yes to both of these points in order to be eligible for a qualified exemption. In Montana, we have distributors who may purchase your produce locally, but then they sell your produce to consumers in other states. These distributors are not considered a local market, and they do not meet the requirements of the qualified exemption parameter. Farms that meet the qualified exemption requirements must keep records showing their eligibility each year. They must also include the farm name and address either on a label, sign, invoice, or at the point of sale. We understand that this new rule is a bit confusing, and we want to help you successfully navigate it. The Montana Department of Agriculture has an interactive tool on their food safety webpage to to help you determine if the produce safety rule applies to your farm. If you determine that you are subject to the rule, there are some important deadlines to be aware of. If you are a large farm subject to the rule, you need to become compliant as soon as possible, and you must have your water requirements completed by 2022. Small farms must become compliant by 2019, and water requirements completed by 2023. Very small farms must become compliant by 2020, and water requirements completed by 2024. Again, this table is available on the Montana Department of Agriculture Food Safety webpage. We want you to be successful. Attending a grower training is the next step in fully understanding the new law and becoming compliant. Check our website for the upcoming trainings. Also, an on-farm readiness review is a free and voluntary educational opportunity that will allow farms subject to the produce safety rule to be better prepared for a regulatory produce safety inspection. This non-regulatory review gives you the opportunity to have an industry professional visit your farm and assess your implementation of the produce safety rule. These reviews are only for the benefit of the farm and are not used for information gathering purposes of any kind. You can learn more about the On-Farm Readiness Review by visiting the Montana Department of Agriculture Food Safety webpage. Again, if at any time you are unsure whether or not your farm produce is subject to the rule, please contact the Food Safety Program of the Montana Department of Agriculture. We have tools and guidance available for you. We also have materials that can help you during the next steps if you are subject to the produce safety rule.